Hey, it's Mike here, and today my response to why vegans have smaller brains and how cows can help the environment. A Dr. Anthony Chaffee YouTube video, a carnivore doctor. He is actually really interviewing 3 authors to a book of the same title approximately.
They were joining me over from England who wrote a wonderful new book called Why Vegans Have Smaller Brains and How Cows are going to save the planet. I probably butchered that, but it's something around there. Vegans have smaller brains in any case is the take home I got from that.
You know, it's really just for people sitting around for over 2 hours poo-pooing on veganism and talking about how great grazing is. But in terms of the brain claim, I consider it a gross misrepresentation of the science, almost criminal misrepresentation. We'll show that by looking at the study they cite, as well as newer research from several lines of higher quality evidence showing really the opposite of their claim. And then we'll also, of course, get into those environmental claims. They make some wild ones, which are just blatantly false based on the literature, as well as the claim that people who just eat cows are more ethical than vegans in terms of the animals they kill.
What we're saying actually is that a meat-based diet is more ethical and humane. Fewer animals are killed.
Lovely stuff. And since it's over 2 hours, I can't respond to every point, but let's just go. Starting with who the heck are these people? Of course, we have carnivore doctor Anthony Chaffee, who I've responded in the past to. I would consider him a straight up plantophobe, despite believing that he's a peak predator like a lion. He's really become the prey of plants because he's so afraid of them and how much they're going to harm him. And he's made several bogus claims like how Brussels sprouts contain 130 different carcinogens, ignoring actual practical literature like how vegetable consumption is associated with lower cancer over and over again. And then we have the 3 authors. We have Anita, a former general practitioner who's, I guess, become obsessed with animal-based foods in recent years. We also have Allison, who worked in the livestock industry for 40 years. And then we also have David, who seems like a real piece of work in terms of his bio. I mean, he did 35 years with the fossil fuel industry. I'm not sure the timeline on that and to what degree of climate change denial that would require, or at least caring about money more. But he also describes himself as a poacher turned gamekeeper. So this is a dude who would just go out and poach wild animals and kill them. And then now I guess he's doing it all above board, which is so much better. And you know, he talks about how he's more ethical than vegan. So that's not going to grind any gears. Anyway, let's get right into their claims about the brain study here, about how, you know, vegan brains going to shrink.
And I said, what this study shows is that they've followed a group of middle-aged and elderly people over 5 years. They've noted what they eat. They've done blood tests to look at various markers, and they've done brain scans at the beginning and end. And what they found is that the less animal food that you have in your diet, the more your brain shrinks with age. So the vegans in this study had the most brain atrophy, the vegetarians next, and the meat eaters the least.
The degree to which this study was mischaracterized, this might be actually a new record in terms of how poorly it was interpreted. She directly says, quote, vegans in this study had the most brain atrophy. Well, guess what? Looking to the study, there was no vegan group. There was no meat-based group. It didn't even mention the word vegan or meat or even the word diet at all. No, this was a study that looked at B12 levels and brain shrinkage over 5 years. It's from 2008. It looked at about 100 people in the UK who were elderly. And we can zoom out and use some logic. You know, this data collection started in the early 2000s. What percent of 100 elderly British people in the early 2000s would be vegan? I'll let you think about that. And to verify, yes, this is the same 2008 study they're talking about. Chaffee says he has cited it in the past, knows about it, but didn't actually correct her about the bogus diet claims.
Actually refer to that study. I'm assuming the 2008.
Oh, you know it?
I do, yeah. If there's one that I can think of as 2008, yeah.
Yes, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, because it relates to B12.
I would also add that people can have low B12 levels or deficiencies from a bunch of different causes, anything from malabsorption, like gastric bypass surgery, to medications that interfere with B12 metabolism, HIV or AIDS, or even alcoholism, which is associated with brain shrinkage as well in particular, and somehow is reversible according to this study, which was mind-boggling. Gotta love science. And the problem here is that they've just stretched the connection here so far, and part of that is because I think they're stuck in the past thinking that vegans have lower B12 levels, but from recent studies again and again and again and again and again now, we see that vegans have adequate B12 levels. And in the case of certain studies, like this one out of Germany, actually has statistically significantly higher B12 levels. My B12, last I took it, was higher than the average meat eater, despite my embarrassingly spotty supplementation. So yeah, between fortified foods and supplementation, vegans appear to be covered nowadays. And then I would just say, with vegans occasionally having higher B12 levels, from their logic, wouldn't that mean that meat eaters have smaller brains? You can just see how much of a stretch all this is. But that's just one line of evidence. We have several more supporting that they're wrong. First of all, we have that recent Ornish randomized control trial. It took people with mild Alzheimer's and put them on a plant-based diet plus some lifestyle changes for 5 years, and they had a control group. And we could even see some improvements in that plant-based diet group by some metrics. Well, we saw things just get worse in the control group, which was, of course, eating meat. And this is really relevant because Alzheimer's is largely a brain shrinkage disease. You know, there are various mechanisms going on, but the result is that over time, people's brains get smaller when they have Alzheimer's. And then we have another really interesting 2019 study that looked at 850 people, so 8 times the size of their 2008 study. And it looked at various food groups and brain shrinkage over about 4 years. And of all of the different food groups, meat, fish, etc., the one that was actually statistically significantly and powerfully associated with less brain shrinkage was vegetable consumption, of which carnivore dieters eat 0. So based off this much higher quality study, carnivores have the smallest brains. Oh, how about that? Uno reverse. Anyway, what is the study saying? Well, they're saying that other research in the past has found similar results, and they point to the mechanism being all of these plant compounds, which are so scary to Anthony Chaffee, pointing to antioxidants and anti-inflammatory modulators, specifically polyphenols, flavonoids, and anthocyanidins, which they say are potent antioxidants that have shown to ameliorate brain functional deterioration, reductions in synaptic plasticity, and neuroinflammation. Yummy. And they even looked at the particular areas of the brain, and we can see that low vegetable consumption was associated with more shrinkage in the prefrontal cortex, which is the logic and reasoning center, which explains how someone could misinterpret that study on B12 so much. Meat-based brain shrinkage. And the wildest part here is that Anita and them later admit that the title of the video was really just meant to get as much attention as possible, admitting that the study was a stretch, however, again, still directly misrepresenting it in the statement that she made in this video. So not cool.
And this friend on the phone said, so what you're saying is that a vegetarian diet shrinks the brain? I said, I suppose so. He said, so why don't you call the book that? And I said, that's going to be offending too many people. So then I changed it to why vegans have smaller brains, because
we decided we wanted the attention.
And we want the attention.
It's the new year, and you might be looking for a science-backed way to elevate your cells, or salivate, not to be confused with being celibate. Take a quick look at today's sponsor, Fatty 15, which is an award-winning vegan supplement that uses the fatty acid C15 in its pure form. Research shows it supports improvements in various areas like cellular health, metabolic health, and longevity. This paper in the journal Nutrients mentions that it acts on 10 different cell systems, and it had at least 36 particular cellular benefits, beating anti-aging drugs in this chart. There are multiple fresh randomized control trials from 2024 on this. For example, this one showing that yes, taking it does increase your levels of C15 and also increase levels of hemoglobin in even young individuals, which could indicate stronger cells. Also, this 2024 randomized control trial found that C15 supplementation lowered LDL cholesterol and could cause beneficial shifts in the gut microbiome. You might be wondering how long it takes before it works. Well, the first few weeks may have some benefits in terms of less snacking and hunger and sleep, etc. But a survey of 2,500 people who took it found that 72% reported seeing a benefit within 4 months. We're talking improved blood labs, metabolic, liver, heart, etc., as well as some of those other benefits. And I've been taking it and feeling good, and I am personally looking forward to feeling 15 again. That's not what the supplement does. And if you want to try Fatty 15, you can just click the link below and use the code MIC, M-I-C, at checkout for 10% off your first subscription order. All right. And really the thesis of these authors is that meat is going to prevent brain shrinkage. Well, if we look at meat as a category, it completely failed to prevent brain shrinkage from that study of 850 people. And I would love to see more studies on mental performance in vegans versus meat eaters. We just have one small one that looked at memory and sleep. Memory, of course, is the relevant one here. And they had 5 groups, high and low meat consumption omnivore groups, as well as pescatarian, vegetarian, and vegan groups. And we can just see, looking at the memory scores, that the loosely plant-based people and vegans were just clustered up there with better memory performance, and the omnivores were down there with worse memory performance. So yeah, meat eaters, if you want a good memory, maybe you should be eating more plants. But will you be able to remember that I said that? All right, now let's move on to the environmental claims, and there are many, and the research does not match up with them.
So the subtitle of our book is How Cows Reverse Climate Change, because they actually do. They don't contribute to it. Ruminants don't contribute to it.
And this is really wild to me because they are not trying to present some crazy new method of livestock grazing. They're not like Alan Savory with his holistic management, which is really hard to follow and doesn't ever seem to live up to expectations, but at least it's new and he can make all these claims. In this case, they're just saying good old conventional grazing, etc., isn't having any negative effect on climate change and can reverse it. And they straight up say that ruminants don't contribute to climate change. Well, to the FAO and their reports, it's between 14.5% and 18% of human-driven greenhouse gas emissions. I don't know what they're thinking. And there are other reports that are even higher than that, but I will let them continue here.
Even in the UN assessments of livestock emissions, they just emphasize emissions, and they don't mention that it's actually a cycle. It's the biogenic carbon cycle.
I kind of don't understand what she's trying to say here, other than just maybe that the carbon cycle exists, therefore natural sources in the carbon cycle can't cause climate change, which is obviously logically wrong. And for a ridiculous, goofy analogy, we can imagine another planet, maybe the one that the Autobots are from the Transformers, where we have cars that are living, they're alive, they're natural, but they're still cars. Let's say we have 500 million of them. They have their own equilibrium in terms of their carbon cycle, and we just multiply that by 4 or 8 times, relevant numbers as you will see. Obviously, it's going to emit more and create a carbon imbalance.
As you say, we've had ruminants on this planet for 50 million years, far longer than we've been around, and in similar numbers to the numbers we have today, wild and domesticated.
Okay, so she's saying the numbers are roughly the same for natural wild ruminants before domestication versus current ruminants. And this, by every single metric, appears to be really wrong. And I normally don't rely on ChatGPT to do research, but I kind of wanted to test it with this one and see what it would cite. And they say, yeah, according to the FAO, we have about 4 billion ruminants on planet Earth today. Well, in the past, before domestication, it might have been in the 100 billions or low billions. So we're talking again between 4 and 8 times as many ruminants, emitting at least 4 to 8 times as much methane, because we are overfeeding them to create as much meat as possible, which would absolutely lead to them burping out more methane.
And we've got lots and lots of species of ruminants, lots of wild ruminants that everybody just ignores. It only seems to be domesticated livestock that cause methane and climate change.
Are we really ignoring all the wild ruminants, or is it just, again, that there are hardly any? Looking to this Our World in Data chart, we can see all of the wild mammal biomass versus the domesticated mammal biomass, and subtract the whales there, which is 2 out of 4 blocks, and you can see why people are drawing attention to the domesticated ones. It's an uproar.
And the methane is produced, but it is broken down within a fairly quick time, around about 10 years, back to carbon dioxide. And that carbon dioxide is then taken out of the air again by the plants, which the animal then eats. So we've just got a cycle. There's no additional methane being added to the atmosphere.
So she goes on a rant about methane, saying that, really just lasts for 10 years and then it's gone. And for whatever reason, that means it doesn't count. But it's important to note that the global warming potential, really the power compared to CO2 for methane, is 32 times over 100 years and 86 times over 20 years. And then I would further add something that nobody seems to mention ever, and I've mentioned a bunch completely in one ear out the other, and that is the airborne fraction of CO2 being only 45%. So less than half the CO2 that is emitted makes it up into the atmosphere. The rest gets sucked up by trees, plants, algae, etc. Yet with methane, virtually all of it makes into the atmosphere, and global warming potential doesn't calculate this. So we really need to be more than doubling methane emissions when comparing them to CO2 emissions. The only part here that's accurate is that, yes, methane, when it gets into the atmosphere, burns hot, so to speak, for the first 10 years, and then it breaks down into CO2. But that is average. That is counted within the calculations, and it's still super duper high.
It's long been understood by anybody that's ever been involved in farming that crops deplete the soil of its nutrients and its carbon content. You need grass and livestock to put that back in the form of manure and the sequestration from the grass.
She pushes this idea that all plant crops alone can't sequester carbon and that grazing and animals are required. But from this analysis of 32 peer-reviewed studies, organic crop farming increased soil organic carbon by 2.2% per year on average. Conventional farming didn't see much change, though obviously we have lost topsoil from that in the past. But just to prove her factually incorrect, we can look to this grazing study out of Tibet that looked at soil organic carbon over 5 years. And what they did was they used exclosures, which is the opposite of an enclosure. So they're excluding animals from being able to graze in a certain area. And that ungrazed area had twice the soil organic carbon as the grazed area at the end of the study, 187 versus 380 grams per kilogram. And we can also just look at the visuals of these exclosures from different sources, and we can see that over and over again, like the denser vegetation remains in the exclosure. And of course, if you have dense vegetation, you have more surface area on photosynthesizing leaves, etc. They're more productive for longer, and then they can store more carbon in the roots. And of course, this is going to vary depending on the environment. Like, let's say you have a relatively arid environment and you're functionally watering it through cattle, like you're gonna get more plant growth that way, and we can kind of cook the numbers like that. But even if you are able to store some soil carbon in a grazing system, virtually all these studies are massively undercounting or completely ignoring the methane that is emitted by these cows, which they're basically taking that carbon, they're basically taking the carbohydrates, the carbon in that grass, and multiplying it off into methane, which brings me to the soil carbon saturation limit, which was even mentioned in the White Oaks Pastures report. Now, that was designed to make grazing look good for the environment, and they even mentioned in there that after about 10 or 12 years, you hit a point in which these grasslands aren't storing more carbon, so you're just going to be carbon positive after that anyway.
With our farmers these days, we are always advising them, if they're growing arable crops, to put in a cover crop so that the land isn't bare for a lot of the time. So that helps to reduce the emissions, and also to helps reduce the erosion of the soil by rain and wind and so on. But it doesn't you don't get sequestration of carbon in those arable crops.
And I want to say that I agree with her that cover crops are beneficial. I'm a big fan of cover crops, but they're more beneficial than she's saying. She's saying they don't sequester carbon, which is just wrong based off all the best data. For example, this meta-analysis that says that cover crops' ability to sequester soil organic carbon is highly efficient. We also have this massive analysis of studies saying that, yeah, cover crops have the potential to sequester approximately 60 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent per year when planted across 20 million acres, offsetting the emissions from 12.8 million passenger vehicles. And then we have this issue where if you're trying to graze all of these animals, that they're less efficient, they're getting less calorie-dense food, and therefore you need more of them and you need more land. And this study looked particularly at that, finding that in the US, if we were to just rely on grazing, we would only be able to produce about 1/4 as much beef as is currently being made in the US, and we would have to do it with a lot more animals, and that's using all the grassland that we have. So she makes this comment about how great sheep are in the UK, and I think I should just hand this over to somebody else who's from the UK, and that is, Guardian columnist and author George Monbiot. Here he is talking about how the UK's land has been sheep-wrecked.
Since the Second World War, with agricultural subsidies, which have encouraged people first to load the hills with sheep and then to clear even more habitat, has been a great acceleration of destruction, so that even the small bits which were left have been cleared away and scoured, and we live now in a sheep-wrecked country.
He talks about how the UK should largely be these rainforests, which people aren't aware of, and that sheep farming in the UK has done to their rainforest what cattle farming has done to the Amazon rainforest, which from this paper, cattle ranching is responsible for at least 80% of Amazon destruction. So he's saying, yeah, they've completely destroyed the landscape with sheep in the UK. And here she is saying that it's amazing.
And wherever you see the fern polypody, the many-footed fern which grows along the branches of oak trees and other trees, that's a sign that rainforest used to grow. And in fact, it covered these hills.
All right, now let's get into this claim that eating beef is more ethical than being vegan in terms of animal deaths.
So I said that figure earlier, about 2,400 insects per square meter of UK land, an insect every 2 centimeters. It takes about a square meter of wheat to grow enough wheat to mill enough flour to make 1 loaf of bread. So that's 2,400 insects have been sprayed on that area of land to produce a loaf of bread. If you get about 24 slices in a loaf, it's 100 dead insects per slice of bread. If you think you're being vegan for environmental reasons, ethical, animal, saving animal reasons, you're not.
So first off, I'm just going to say every time, it's been 4 or 5 times now that these carnivore dieters try and make this claim, they're always doing this crazy appeal to nirvana or appeal to perfection on their side, where they're thinking of this perfect example, this perfect cow grazing in a pasture versus like the worst industrial agriculture for plant production, and then exaggerated uncited numbers often, like this 2,400 figure, which everywhere I look, I'm finding way lower numbers. I've not found that number anywhere. But the reality is, again, that 99% of animals are factory farmed, and even, especially in the US, the ones that are labeled pasture raised, well, they're finished in a feedlot. The ones that are labeled grass fed, often fed grass pellets, or grass that was harvested, so you're gonna have harvest deaths if that's something that you're trying to argue about. And then also how vegans are obsessed with lowering animal deaths, and if the vegan population increased and we had more vegan farmers, if we're gonna appeal to nirvana on all sides, then they're gonna be obsessed with lowering these types of deaths. But then just in terms of actual research here on perhaps some pesticide use on wheat farming, organic wheat farming can be a solution here. Looking to this German paper, they say, quote, to summarize, at present, the use of pesticides in organic wheat production is minimal, which of course means that insect deaths would then relatively be minimal. And since we don't have true research on this, who's to say that minimal pesticide usage in a wheat field is going to kill less insects per calorie or whatever you're comparing than a cow that has to live for 24 months that's going to be stepping on and accidentally eating bugs. I mean, if we want to make these types of minutia arguments, but vegans know that they're not perfect. Well, on the other side, you have somebody trying to justify directly, purposefully, intentionally killing a highly sentient bovine animal. And of course, this would be a topic for another video, but there's a ton of ways that you can farm plants that require less pesticides. There's things like crop rotation and other techniques that are going to lead to less sort of blooms of insect populations and pest populations. And all these carnivore dieters are slamming down chicken and other types of meat that, of course, are fed grain that would have a massive impact. But there are also other plant foods. If you do want to be comparing different types of foods, that, of course, would have a way lower impact. I mean, we're talking about things like nuts and fruits, etc. But let's just be completely freaking honest here. This guy does not give a crap about insects. He just wants to justify these animals that he's killing. And a good way to do that is to take the people that aren't killing these animals and say that they're worse by fudging a bunch of numbers and just being ridiculous. Ex-poacher, classic ex-poacher behavior. All right, well, in the end, in terms of that brain claim especially, the wild misrepresentation of the actual study needs to be studied because it is so unhinged. Again, it was a study on B12 that didn't even look at diets, and it's from over 15 years ago, while we have newer studies, again, showing that vegans are crushing it in terms of B12, as well as one that's 8 times bigger, showing that vegetables are associated with lower brain shrinkage, more so than any other food group. Yet this is Dr. Anthony Chaffee, a carnivore dieter's YouTube channel, somebody who's telling you to eat 0 vegetables. And yeah, also their environmental claims are to be expected from somebody that's worked in the livestock industry from 30 years. And yeah, the environmental claims are really exactly what's to be expected from somebody who has been working in the livestock industry for 30 years, that it just has no impact at all. Poof, any methane that a cow burps out, just non-existent, it's just natural, doesn't matter. And then the idea that meat eaters are more ethical than vegans in terms of animal deaths, well, I'll just let you guys comment down below on that one, and then any other responses that I failed to mention, any good points, let me know as well. And of course, you can click the link below if you want to try Fatty 15 and use the code MIC, that's MIC, for 10% off your first subscription. And of course, if you would like to try Fatty 15, you can click the link below and use the code MIC, that's MIC, for 10% off your first subscription order. All right, thanks for watching. Feel free to like, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.